When I was 12 or 13, my grandma, cousin, and I stayed on the Queen Mary for a night or two. I think this was around 2013. And the ship is apparently haunted because of how many people died on it during its prime. Actually, we were told about ghost sightings, and the receptionist even recommended a ghost tour, but my grandma's religious and scoffs at that kind of thing, so we didn't do it. That night, we checked in, and she and my cousin went to bed early, but I decided to explore the ship. It was pretty dead, and I was basically the only guest wandering around the ship. It was eerie, though, because it was pretty early in the night. At some point, I went outside to the top deck and just walked around a bit and suddenly felt someone was near me. Like I had this urge to get away from it, so I started walking in the opposite direction. And I don't know, for some reason my instincts are telling me to run, so I did. And after running to the other side of the ship, I turned around and I see someone. It was a man, and I just assumed it was an employee, but after looking closer, he was wearing very old clothes, like clothes from that time period when the ship was active. He had a mustache and called me crazy, but he had a green aura to him, like he was literally glowing a subtle green. I know how crazy this sounds, but I swear that's what I saw. And then I saw actual employees on the ship and walked towards them. Then I just went ahead and went back to my room. I've always considered myself religious and never, ever, even so much as entertained the thought of spirits or ghosts. But that night had me questioning that. Maybe because of my beliefs, the spirit or ghost was naturally drawn to me. I don't know, maybe he wanted to be seen. I don't think it was a living employee because they wore modern day uniforms and he was wearing old clothes. Also, he was glowing, so there's that. I don't know how else to explain it though.
What you just heard is the account of someone who wishes to remain anonymous, but allowed me to retell his experience aboard the Queen Mary. Many stories of apparitions, voices, and other paranormal activity have been told about the Queen Mary throughout her long history. Tales of ghosts and spirits are easy to brush aside as nonsense, unless, of course, you are the one who witnessed it. The RMS Queen Mary, today on Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs. Welcome to Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs, Tales of Mishaps, Misfortune, and Misadventure. I am your host, Rich Napolitano. Today, we have for you Wrecktoberfest Volume 2, Ghosts of the Queen Mary. We're having a little fun with these spooky tales of ghosts and paranormal activity. I hope you enjoyed Wrecktoberfest Volume 1 about the ghost ship Orange Madan and the St. Augustine Lighthouse. Today, we have the story of the RMS Queen Mary, which had a long and illustrious history as a passenger liner, but is also known as possibly the most haunted ship in the world. Joining me today is my lovely wife and friend of the show, Dawn Napolitano. Welcome, Dawn.
Thank you, Rich. Very glad to be back.
You might recall Dawn joined me for episode 3 about the Summit Venture and the Sunshine Skyway Bridge disaster. Well, Dawn, you ready to crack open that portal to the other realm?
Oh, gives me chills. I'm ready. Let's do it.
Following World War I, passenger travel across the oceans increased all across Europe and North America. Several large and fast ships had been built in Germany and France, such as the Bremen, Europa, and Ile-de-France. And the famed English lines of Cunard and White Star were playing catch-up. Cunard began construction on hull number 534 in 1930 on the River Clyde at the John Brown and Company shipyard in Clydebank, Scotland. But not long after, in 1931, construction was halted due to the Great Depression. Cunard applied for and was granted a loan to finish building the ship, but was forced to merge with the also struggling White Star Line. The newly formed Cunard White Star Line was loaned enough money for 2 new passenger liners, and construction resumed in 1934.
However, as the story goes, the Queen Mary was originally planned to be named the Queen Victoria. When King George V, Queen Victoria's grandson, was told by Cunard representatives, "We have decided to name our new ship after England's greatest queen," King George's response was, "My wife, Queen Mary, will be delighted that you are naming the ship after her." Hence, the Queen Victoria became the Queen Mary. For the record, Cunard has long denied the authenticity of the story, but it has become a fun part of the lore of the old ship. The Queen Mary's maiden voyage was May 27, 1936, from Southampton, England. The 81,000-ton liner is 310.7 meters long, 36 meters wide, and 2 times the size of the Titanic. Despite her size, she won the Blue Riband in 1936, reaching a speed of 33 knots, which is about 61 kilometers or 38 miles per hour. Just a reminder, the Blue Riband is given to the ship that crosses the Atlantic with the fastest average speed. In addition to being fast, the Queen Mary was also luxurious. She boasted 4 main floors, 2 entire floors of cabins, 2 cocktail bars, 2 swimming pools, 5 dining areas, and a grand ballroom. The luxury passenger liner operated from 1936 to 1967 for the Cunard White Star Line, along with the sister ship, the Queen Elizabeth. The 2 ships provided weekly service between Southampton, Cherbourg, and New York.
During World War II, the Queen Mary was refitted for military use, including 40mm anti-aircraft guns, painted all gray, and served as a transport and supply ship. Its speed earned it the nickname Gray Ghost because it could easily outrun and outmaneuver enemy submarines. The Queen Mary transported over 800,000 troops during the war, including over 16,000 in one trip alone. Even Winston Churchill traveled on the Queen Mary many times during the war, using codename Colonel Worden. He was given an office on board in which he could conduct business, and as we all know, the Prime Minister was rarely without a cigar. People passing by this room have claimed to have smelled cigar smoke coming from inside, and a man's voice mumbling and grumbling. After World War II, the Queen Mary was returned to its prior glory to serve again as a passenger liner. In 1965, the aging ship was sold to the city of Long Beach, California, and was officially retired in 1967. Her final voyage was on October 31st, 1967, carrying 1,040 passengers to Long Beach. The journey was an especially long one because the ship was too large for the Panama Canal, and it had to travel 40 days around Cape Horn to get to California. The Queen Mary has remained permanently moored in Long Beach as a tourist attraction, museum, and hotel ship. The ship was closed to the public in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Desperately needing repairs and upgrades, she was handed over to the Long Beach Harbor Department and remains closed as of October of 2022. But just because it is closed, it doesn't mean there are no occupants.
When construction resumed in 1934, 2 workers were found dead near the bottom of the hull. It has never been determined what happened to these men, but it has been speculated that they took their own lives upon learning that they would lose their jobs. Whether it was accidental or intentional, the 2 men would be the first to pass away on the ship. Another legend tells of a worker being sealed inside the double hull and left to die. While possible, no evidence has ever been produced to support this. However, many strange noises have been heard in the bow of the ship, such as tools banging and people screaming and crying. Could it be one of these men crying out for help? The bow of the Queen Mary experienced another tragic event which might explain its ghostly phenomenon. On October 2, 1942, the Queen Mary was transporting troops from New York to Glasgow. and was joined by the escort cruiser HMS Curaçao in the waters north of Ireland. At 28 knots, the Queen Mary zigzagged along its route as per regulations to avoid detection by enemy submarines, while the Curaçao attempted to match her speed and course. The smaller cruiser could not match her speed, though. It gave up ground little by little until she was far too close. Suddenly, the Queen Mary rammed right through the Curaçao midships, cutting her in two. Those who were able to swim clear of the ship floated helplessly in the freezing water as the Queen Mary raced away from them. It was not permitted to stop to rescue survivors doing a convoy such as this. Out of the 430 on board the Curaçao, only 99 survived. People have often reported hearing the sounds of screaming and the rush of oncoming water emanating from the engine room at the front of the ship. Could these be the victims from the Curaçao?
Even more deaths occurred on board during the war. When returning to the United States from Europe, the Queen Mary often transported German and Italian prisoners of war in her cargo hold. These men were often wounded or sick, or would become so during the uncomfortable voyage. Wounded American soldiers were also transported west on the Queen Mary, and not all of these men would make it home either. A legend of the Queen Mary tells the story of a cook who was allegedly shoved into a large oven and cooked to death by Australian soldiers, although no records were kept to indicate this actually happened. But people have claimed to hear the screams of a man coming from the ship's galley. An unknown number of people died on the Queen Mary during World War II, adding to the possible spirits that might be haunting the ship. Moving through the ship brings us to what is thought to be the central point of paranormal activity, the first-class pool. Psychics and paranormal investigators believe the changing rooms at the pool are a vortex, allowing spirits to come and go from the ship. Those who have investigated the area claim to hear whispers and feel dizzy. Some have even claimed to see the ghostly visage of a cat.
This pool is a gorgeous Art Deco-styled room with an indoor pool, double staircase, balcony with an adjoining Turkish bath, brass railings, and an impressive ceiling made of quartz and mother of pearl. It has been closed to the public and drained of water since the early 1970s for safety issues. People claim to have seen small wet footprints leading from the pool into the dressing rooms, splashing sounds, and laughter. When investigated, there is nobody there. A young woman in 1960s style clothing is said to roam the halls of the pool area, frequently walking up and down the staircase and disappearing behind a pillar. One of the most well-known and most witnessed spirits in the first-class pool area is that of a young girl named Jackie. Not much is known about this girl, but she's most likely Jacqueline Torin, a young girl of 5 or 6 who allegedly drowned in the ship's second-class swimming pool. This could have occurred during the brides and babies voyage, as there were many children who were passengers during that time. Records were not kept during the ship's military service, so Jackie's origins remain unclear. The second-class pool was removed when the Royal Theatre was installed, but Jackie now haunts the first-class pool area. Guests and crew of the Queen Mary have reported hearing mysterious splashing in the pool and a young girl's voice crying for help. Some have even called out to and claimed to have heard Jackie respond. Paranormal investigator Peter James and a film crew famously recorded a 10-minute conversation with Jackie in 1991. In the recording, you can hear the voice of a young girl responding to James in a conversation-like manner. Jackie's regarded as a friendly and playful spirit. Many have reported hearing the giggling, laughing, and even singing of a young girl. She also appears to enjoy playing a game of peekaboo from the upstairs balcony before disappearing and then reappearing elsewhere around the pool. A photograph of Jackie peering over the balcony has even been captured. If you are to believe that, of course. It remains a mystery, but perhaps Jackie haunts the halls of the Queen Mary, desperately searching for her mother.
We will return with more Ghosts of the Queen Mary after this sponsor break. Another spirit from the pool area is named Sarah. Very little is known or even speculated about her, but she has manifested herself both verbally and physically to some. It is believed she's also a young girl and seems to take on the role of Jackie's protector. Peter James claimed to have asked Jackie questions only to hear Sarah respond repeatedly with,
"No."
Sarah also has a dark side. Guests and crew report being physically touched, pushed, and scratched by Sarah. Bill Souter, a maritime historian and archivist who was a staff member on board the Queen Mary, says he was forcefully pushed while on the balcony checking on the light fixtures. Just as suddenly as he was pushed, he was pulled back before falling. Some believe Sarah and Jackie might have been murdered on board, perhaps at the same time, but no evidence exists to suggest this is true. Possibly the most well-known of the spirits believed to reside on the Queen Mary is the White Lady. She has appeared wearing a shimmering white dress and floating at the end of a passageway to the Queen's Salon. This was an elegant ballroom where guests would dine, dance, and mingle. It is common for her to be seen dancing to music that cannot be heard. She is known to be pleasant in appearance, but simply dissipates when encountered. It is generally accepted by the ship's staff that this elegant white lady has taken little Jackie as her own daughter and possibly Sarah as well. Some guests have reported hearing the White Lady sing to Jackie.
Not all of the supposed ghosts of the Queen Mary were former passengers. In 1936, the very first captain of the ship, Sir Edgar Britton, was found lifeless in his cabin, having suffered a stroke. He was pronounced dead at Southampton Hospital and was buried at sea. Also, in October 1948, Third Officer Thomas Marshall slipped from a ladder and fell to his death. The spirit of John Henry is one of the more notable legends. He was probably a welder or performed other duties in the boiler room toward the bow of the ship. Legend has it he was scalded to death by a burst pipe, or possibly crushed to death. Some even believe he is one of the workers whose body was found in the hull of the ship when construction of the Queen Mary resumed after the Great Depression. His spirit has been encountered only in this specific area of the ship, which has been converted into the green room for entertainers on board. Sounds of wrenches clanging and other tools are sometimes heard from this room where John Henry once worked. Mr. Henry apparently is more accepting of females in his presence and has been known to gently touch or caress female guests while harassing any males who are present.
Another less than agreeable spirit on board the Queen Mary is nicknamed Grumpy. Paranormal investigator Bob Davis named this spirit due to the spirit's tendency to growl at anyone passing by. He is also referred to as Grumpy the Growling Ghost. Some believe Grumpy may be a former captain of the Queen Mary. Another candidate is a passenger who murdered a woman on board and hid her body under the stairs. He later committed suicide to avoid prosecution, and perhaps his spirit prefers spending eternity on the Queen Mary instead of the alternative. Despite his ill-favored nickname, Grumpy always provides excitement when he makes his presence known. A tragic accident involving an officer of the Queen Mary could be responsible for another of the ship's permanent residents. Senior Second Officer William Stark was preparing to entertain two guests, two officers who had just recently been assigned. Stark asked the steward to bring some gin. Searching the nearby cabins, the steward found a bottle of gin and delivered it to Stark. However, the bottle was strangely filled with tetrahydrochloride, a powerful and poisonous cleaning fluid. Stark unknowingly consumed the poison before his guests arrived, and later was unconcerned when he discovered his mistake. Over the next several days, Stark developed horrible cramps and he slowly died in agonizing pain. Stark's ghost has since been seen on the promenade deck. Coughing and choking sounds have been heard coming from the ship's hospital ward, where he endured his suffering. Because of the manner of his death, some believe Stark is Grumpy the Growling Ghost.
Well, the last captain of the Queen Mary was Captain John Treasure Jones, who was in command of the ship from 1965 to 1967, and guided the aging ship to its final destination in Long Beach. Jones spent almost 50 years of his life at sea and retired following the retirement of the Queen Mary. The apparition of a captain walking proudly around the bridge with a first officer is a common sight. He is occasionally seen on the promenade deck and other spots on board, but the ship's bridge is the old captain's favorite place to be. Our next ghost of the Queen Mary is that of a young man by the name of John Petter. In 1966, at just 18 years of age, Petter began working on the Queen Mary in the engine room. During a routine safety drill, Petter and some of the other young men entertained themselves by playing a game of chicken with the watertight doors. After an alarm sounded, the seamen were given a minute or two before the doors would close. Petter, in an effort to impress, waited until the very last second to try to jump through the opening. Sadly, he did not time his jump well, and the metal door slammed into place, killing him. The nature of this accident has given Petter the nickname of Half-Hatch Harry. The ghost has often been seen around this watertight door and in the engine room, wearing his white work overalls. Voices and whispers have been heard, and oily handprints have been discovered near the door. Petter also seems to prefer the company of females. Men passing through the area have claimed to see dark shadows quickly hiding and moving away. The ship's staff sometimes finds tools such as wrenches and hammers in odd places of the ship. Could this be Petter or another former engine room worker playing pranks? By the way, the watertight door, which killed John Petter, is door number 13.
Room B340 has long been thought to contain a dark and unsettled presence, including a ghost nicknamed Samuel the Savage, who somehow ripped himself apart in the room. Crew members and others have claimed to feel nauseous or lightheaded when they enter this room. While there are many rumors, there is no evidence anything ever happened in this room, and no record of anyone dying in this room. In fact, it was not used as a guest cabin since the ship arrived in Long Beach, having served as a storage room. It has in more recent years been set up as a guest cabin again, enticing guests to stay a night in the room. Claims persist of unnatural occurrences coming from this room, including voices, whispers, unexplained knocking, sink faucets mysteriously turning on, cold spots, and an ominous oppressive feeling. Perhaps this is enough to chill anyone to the bone, but the real fright is in room B474. Paranormal investigator Peter James first reported spirits Dana and Penny in room B474. Dana was a young girl of just 4 years, and her sister Penny was only 2. In 1959, a crew member was alarmed by the sound of a gunshot. Rushing to find the source, he discovered the 2 girls and their mother strangled to death on the bed, and the father of the girls was found in the bathroom, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The bodies were then stored in the freezer until they could reach New York. Many strange occurrences have been reported in and around this room, including the sounds of a man and a woman arguing, cold spots, dizziness, and even a feeling of rage. The voices of 2 young girls laughing and playing have been heard coming from the room and other nearby areas. They also seem to enjoy the first-class pool area and have been reported in the green room, which is the former boiler room, with Grumpy and John Henry. We will return with more about the Queen Mary after this sponsor break. All around the ship, there have been reports of voices, laughter, cold spots, strange knocking, and doors opening and closing. Smells of perfume, cigars, and cigarettes are common occurrences in the staterooms, causing guests to open the porthole windows. Apparitions referred to as shadow people are a common sight as well. People who have seen these shadows describe them as blurs of black that dart in and out of their peripheral vision, but are never seen when looking directly at them. The Queen Mary has been closed to the public since 2020 and has remained closed as of October 2022, as it awaits desperately needed upgrades and repairs. This has given the permanent residents of the Queen Mary some time to themselves. But perhaps Jackie, the White Lady, John Petter, and Grumpy are getting lonely. When and if the ship reopens, they will be anxiously awaiting new guests. That is going to do it for Ghosts of the Queen Mary, and that will also wrap up Wrecktoberfest for 2022. I hope you've enjoyed these stories of the strange and unexplained. Thank you so much to all of you for listening. I have a favor. I'm asking all my listeners to please give the show a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. If you use a different podcast player, then hop over to podchaser.com and leave a review there. Ratings and reviews help other people, like you, to find the show. It costs you nothing and will only take a moment. Shipwrecks and Sea Dogs is written, produced, and edited by me, Rich Napolitano. Original theme music is by Sean Siegfried, and you can follow him at Sean Secret on YouTube. Thank you also to Alan Nail for voicing the first-hand account at the beginning of this episode. You will not want to miss the next episode. I had the pleasure of interviewing a real sea dog, Mr. Hugo Valin, who has twice broken the record for crossing the Atlantic in the smallest vessel. How small? You'll have to wait and find out. Until next time, beware of stowaway ghosts.
Bye.